Boy, the world is getting pretty interesting. Um, I was in town the other day, yesterday, doing my driving thing. They're almost at the well, I guess I'm just a little over the halfway point now, so it takes forever to get done. But anyway, I was walking along the bus and I met up with one of the guys from the LaRouche pack. Don't know if he was Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, or Hungarian, but yeah, pretty thick accent. But I donated $10 to the LaRouche pack and stuff like that. And they're talking. He was talking about Glass-Steagall up here and stuff like that, which was really, kind of a strange idea for Canada in some ways. But we did have something like that. So it's just people are not aware of what it is. So it was interesting to see him so close to Parliament Hill and stuff like that. But he was talking about like the economic war that's kind of going on between Russia, China, and all the BRICS nations and which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Singapore. And then, of course, with the Chinese AIIB, with they got like something like 105 countries signed on to that. And right now, it turns out that the Chinese yuan is basically fourth most traded currency right now. So they're making grounds there. Doesn't mean they're not corrupt. Doesn't mean they're not in the doing. It's just different empires fighting, right? But that's one thing he did say was, he talked about the transatlantic Anglo-American empire and how it's kind of fighting with, the Eurasian Pacific Empire, right? The world being kind of split into two. Now, Lyndon LaRouche himself, I listen to him from time to time, and the man, he's up there pretty good. But the LaRouche pack, they seem pretty cool in the sense that they do know what's going on, and they do explain themselves well. And one of the good points he made, and this kind of comes into what this World War III update is going to kind of, some of the things that are going to be in it, is he was talking about it particularly here in Canada. And you've probably heard me say in the past that Canada has the capacity, with all our resources and everything we have, to be a world superpower, non-nuclear superpower. If we wanted to be a nuclear superpower, it would be, it's just a decision, okay, do we enrich the uranium today or tomorrow? Most people around the world get their uranium from us. And Canada we're like number one in mining, usually in a lot of places. That's kind of our expertise, especially going abroad. Sometimes it can be a bit controversial, but that's some of what we do here. So what he was saying, he goes, is like Canada's system is the same as the States, where it's a debt-based, it's a monetary system that's basically debt-based for profit, but it doesn't, which would be okay if it actually made profit, but it doesn't make profit, right? And you get these too big to fails and all this, rather than a, benefit humanity. So what he was talking about was like big energy projects. And the LaRouche pack has been talking a lot about cold fusion and working on that and stuff like that. And we are close to it. They have sustained fusion for a few seconds. Now, sustaining it indefinitely, that's, I think we're a long way away from that, but we have to invest in it for it to happen. Now, cold fusion, I say, yeah, invest in it a bit, but, here in Canada, hydroelectric, we got so much freaking water here. Quebec here has the lowest emissions in just about any industrialized area on the planet because of our hydro. We can run everything off of hydro, which we send more hydro to the States than what we use here. We're only 8 million people in Quebec. That's it. So it's not, that's a lot of light bulbs. Don't get me wrong, but still, it's nothing. We can export this resource as much as we want, and it's renewable, right? So it's things like that. So there's no reason why, for example, Quebec should have the deficit it has. There's no reason why Canada should have the deficit it has at all. And he goes like we have all these resources. What's the problem? Because they're managed by a handful of corrupt people that keep they artificially inflate one thing and hold back other things, right? So that's kind of what him and I were talking about there. And it was a good 10-minute interview. I called it LaRouche Pack interview. Glass-Steagall for Canada, I think is what I called it. So you might want to check it out. And it's more. I only asked him really 2 questions in there. I just let the guy go because he was flowing pretty good. So I wish I had a little bit more time to spend, but I had to run. So, but it was kind of like man on the street type of thing. And I did ask him about the Bank of Canada lawsuit, if he had heard of it, and he says, yeah. He says it's going nowhere. But it's still. What I think is they're just going to tie it up in the courts for the next 1,000 years, right? So we'll have to see what happens with that. Because, again, we're using the same British system, monetary system, the like the City of London, not the City of London, but the banking sector City of London. That's what pretty much all the Anglo-American Empire uses, is that system, right? Which is basically resource extraction through war, is it one way to look at it? And it's a death and debt based economy for the United States. So basically, the Americans aren't manufacturing anything hardly anymore. Us, we manufacture not like we used to, but we're still manufacturing, and we have a much more stable economy, even though it's not as big. Again, we had Prime Minister Harper here talking about global instability. And again, you got to give him the credit on this. He is the only one out there that is talking about, hey, look, in 2008 there's been micro crash after micro crash all over the place. We weathered that storm pretty good, and it's true, we did. We still haven't hit our 2008 crash yet. I know there's some people will disagree with me on it, but trust me, we haven't taken the hit yet. We're still under 10%, well under 10% unemployment. We haven't taken the hit yet. When we look at other countries like Greece and Spain, they have 50 to 70% unemployment amongst the youth. It's just, and in the States, although they hide the job, they calculate the job numbers pretty corruptly. They have pretty much a third of their population almost out of work. They have 94 to 96 million people out of work, out of a 318 million, give or take, few million population down there. So they're in big trouble. So my prime minister is saying, look, the micro crashes in China, stuff like that, these things are, we want to stay the course that we're doing. Now, within the system that we're in, okay, which is going to play into the whole war thing, this is what this whole war is about, is the control of this system. It's almost impossible to keep it going. For example, in the States in the past month, they've enacted martial law in the House or in the Congress or whatever to be able to fund the government. So in other words, remember the big thing about the sequester a couple of years ago and the fiscal cliff? Well, they're at that point again. The only difference now is that they're just not telling anybody, because it's like, we'll do it in secret, people don't know. We're basically using martial law to print money or divert, or however they're doing it. Because if not, again, when that train stops, man, that one's going off the rails as soon as it stops. So up here, we're getting ready to weather that storm. Harper is telling us, he is telling us, I'm not saying he's a good guy, but he is telling us that the global economy is not stable. That's exactly what he's telling us. And again, I always said he's in it for himself. Now, what does this have to do with World War III update? But this is the framework that has led to all the death and destruction that we see. Now, that said, how does it play out? What does it look like when you have this empires fighting, the Anglo-American Empire fighting the Eurasian Pacific Empire? Well, it looks like this. We're going to go to Syria now, which has been very exciting. The Russians have been making tons of friends in the region and getting a lot of being noticed. The Russians are making noise on this one. They've done, I believe, about 60 airstrikes at the making of this video. And in this time, they've almost all but wiped out ISIS's strongholds. I don't know how many civilians they've killed in the process of doing this. You cannot make an egg without make an omelet without breaking an egg here. I don't know if they've killed as many as the NATO ones or whatever, but it's death and destruction from above. Like the bombs raining down on your head. And you have to consider the power of these bombs. Yes, they're non-nuclear, but a JDAM, 500 pounds, 750 pounds, 1,000 pounds, 2,000 pounds. These things clear land like that. That's land cultivation. It just turns everything to chop suey, and you can't drop it precise enough to only kill 2 people. You know what I mean? It's going to take out a city block. It's going to, like a moderate city block in those types of. So over there in Syria, within the past week, we've seen a lot of things happen. The Russians have told the Israelis, no, we are not going to give Assad S-300 missile systems. Now, the Israelis were out there bragging very recently about their. John McCain was bragging about the 4 Israeli airstrikes between in Iran and in Syria in the past year or two. Remember they took out an S-300 missile system and stuff like that. That wasn't set up. A lot of people mistake. And just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, like a lot of people, oh no, every time you see these things go off, cruise missile, bunker busters, you see these huge, massive mushroom clouds, right? And then sometimes secondary explosions, depending on what they're hitting, particularly weapons depots, so all kinds of explosions, right? And they leave mushroom clouds. People go, oh my God, it's a nuke, it's a dirty bomb, it's this. No, they haven't dropped the nuke yet. That's what you need to be concerned about. That's just how powerful the conventional bombs are. So the nukes, man, we're not ready for those. That is going to be biblical. You know, I mean, these conventional bombs are biblical. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh my God! And the proof that they're not nuclear bombs that are going off on these big explosions is the fact that within, say, 100 miles, you don't just see people dropping dead within a week. You'd see thousands of people just dropping dead from radiation poison. Anybody within a 10-mile radius would probably be dead within a few days, let alone a few weeks. You know, so they're not. And if it's a dirty bomb, they're going to die even faster because a hydrogen bomb burns a lot cleaner than an atom bomb, which basically irradiates as much radiation as possible, but least amount of damage, but the most amount of pollutant, right? So I just said a little parched. So anyway, John McCain, I'll get to him in a second. And somebody take that poor bastard back to the asylum. He is clinically insane. He is clinically insane. That's all I got to say. So we've been hearing the United States out there screaming and crying about shooting down Russian airplanes. We've seen this from Hillary Clinton agreeing, yes, we should enforce a no-fly zone, and maybe not so directly saying, yes, we should shoot down Russian aircraft, but they keep saying, if it comes to that. We had that Carly Fournier, sounds like California, her out there saying, well, we'll enforce our no-fly zone, and if the Russians fly in it, well, they'll pay the consequences, kind of thing, and, if it comes to that, we'll shoot them down. Shooting down Russian aircraft that's the guarantee to World War III. This is the black swan events that I've been saying, and trust me, they want this. They're trying to get the Russians to shoot first, very clearly, and that might not be impossible. I don't think the Russians are stupid enough to do it, but it might not be impossible. We've also heard John McCain, not once, but twice, talk about, hey, look, we should just start shooting down Russian aircrafts. We'll arm the moderate rebels and give them MADPAD launchers or whatever. Wow, they already got them from Ambassador Chris Stevens. That's what got killed over was about 20 or 25,000 of these MADPAD launchers, which I don't think have been. I don't know really where these things went because they don't seem to be shooting down a lot of aircraft. But then again, Assad didn't have a lot of aircraft left there in Syria, right? So maybe they're still all in Libya for the most part, but then again, maybe some of the depots got blown up too. That's probably what the Russians are hitting, because we know that the Russians are hitting weapons depots. Now, right there, okay, ISIS, even if they're a so-called a ragtag of 3,000 to 4,000 guys, right? How do 3,000 to 4,000 guys get weapons depots? Somebody's supplying them. We know who's supplying them, Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabians, they're not happy with the Russians right now, neither are the Turks. So we got McCain out there on AMTV. He was sitting there saying, yeah, well, we could do this and do that. Look, Israel did 4 airstrikes against Assad in the past year, and I guess in Iran and whatever. And the Russians did nothing. So we can go in there and we can take out the Russians and they'll do nothing. The Russians weren't there when, and proof is in the pudding. We know how Netanyahu, if you didn't see that last UN thing, it was, the silence was deafening. It's basically Israel getting thrown under the bus, which you'd say, no, but Israel's in control of almost all this. They're the ones that own the neocons in the Senate, the House and the Senate over there in the United States. Well, you'd be correct to a point, but you have to understand people are rejecting the policy. And that rejection, even at the UN, as corrupt as it is, people know that if we follow what Israel wants, we go to nuclear war. They're not turning their back on Israel in the sense of that they care about the Palestinians. They're like, the Russians are going to be a big problem. So will China. And I know there's still those guys out there, oh, we'll walk through Russia and China in a week. They said that about the Germans twice. World War I was supposed to be 2 weeks max. 4 years of trench warfare later, hell on earth. 5 years in World War II, pretty much. Almost 6. Yeah, those conflicts are only supposed to last a couple of weeks at the most. 2 months, 6 months tops for World War II. And where World War II ended, that's where World War II begins. So we lost, 400 million in World War II? That's the opening credits of World War III. The weaponry in World War II was powerful. But the stuff now isn't, like I just referred a few moments ago, how powerful these weapons, people are mistaking them for nukes. No, they're just that powerful. A Tu-160 full of free-fall bombs, particularly those 10,000-pound free-fall bombs, or the B-52s with the Moabs that are like 35,000 pounds. A B-29, which was probably the heaviest bomber of World War II, well, no, it was the heaviest bomber of World War II, could carry about 20,000 pounds. of ordnance. 20,000 pounds. That's a lot. The average B-17 about 8,000 pounds. A B-25 Mitchell was something like 4,000 pounds. Okay, and those weapons were conventional. They were not as powerful. A 1,000-pound bomb now has a much larger blast radius than the 1,000-pounders before. Why? The composition, the refinement of the composition. Very, very powerful. So this is what I mean. The opening credits are going to be maybe 700-800 million people in like 3 nights. You get 6 Su-24s and backed up by extra air support flying over. They can level a couple of city blocks in each. Okay, now times that by 1,500. The Frogfoots, again, times that by another 1,500. Okay, the SU-30s. There's not that many of them, but if you add up from the SU-27 right through to the SU-35 and all variants in between, including SU-34s, which is about 180 of those, you've got about 1,200 aircraft to deal with. I don't know how many the Russians have sold off, but you're still looking at about 300 or 400 air superiority machines. And then on top of that, you're looking at about another up to 500 Tupolev Bear bombers, 140 that are in active service, but that doesn't mean the other ones can't be pulled out of mothballs. And then on top of that, if they were to pull out old MiG-23s, you got about another 8,000 there, depending on how many they got left. MiG-21s, there was 13,000 of those. Maybe they still have 2,000 of them. Who knows? T-95 tanks, or T-55 tanks. They built 95,000 of those. They've sold off a lot of them, and probably scrapped a lot of them. But they could probably still pull 20,000 of those out of their arses if they want. You have 17,000 T-72s, many of them upgraded. Sure, they might only run a couple of hundred at a time, but you have to factor in the mothball stuff. And the Soviet stuff, maintenance-wise, turnaround times are very, very fast. You wrench on your MiG-21 today, 100 hours later you might work on it again. You wrench on a Black Shark helicopter today, 40 hours later you might wrench on it again. These things can fly 45 minutes without oil in their transmissions. They're tough. The Russians go low-tech, works no matter what on a lot of stuff, but that's, combined with their high-end stuff, it gets pretty dangerous. So getting back to Syria, so people are looking at this hospital that gets bombed by the U.S. airplanes. Don't worry, the people that were killed there, they're just collateral damage, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, Obama did say he was good at killing people, his own words, and he's recently come out with the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership thing on the line here. We signed it here in Canada. It doesn't mean it's passed yet, but I'm pretty sure all 3 governments will pass it. Right now, Moncaire and Trudeau, they're playing opposition. But trust me, they're all on the same system. They're all going to pass it. They're all in the same system. It's illusion of opposition. And we know for sure Harper will pass it. So it covers all your bases. You know what I mean? It covers all your bases. But anyway, the thing is Obama's out there, and his exact quotes were, if we don't set global economic policy, China will. And he's right. That's what the Chinese are doing. They're saying, hey, look, if you don't like the debt-based economy of the Ponzi scheme of the petrodollar, come with us. It's called competition. Now, I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm not saying they're going to be better, because they're corrupt too. That's a problem. Governments around the world don't serve the people. But getting back to Syria, we know Iran has taken delivery of S-300 missile systems, which are one of the best air defense systems on the planet. Could be operated with a crew of 3. I don't know how many they have, probably a few hundred of these. And the S-400 system and S-500 systems they shoot down satellites. They could shoot satellites down on the far side of Mars. These things are pretty powerful. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration there, but you get the idea. The ranges of the missiles are in the 500-mile range. They're interceptors. They bob and weave. They can dodge things. The Russians have put a lot of work into that system. And the S-300 missile system, maybe their export one isn't quite as good as their domestic one, but it has been in... not Serbia, where was it? Bosnia or Serbia? I can't remember exactly where, or maybe Croatia. I can't remember exactly where it was. They shot down the S-117 stealth fighter, which is really a bomber, but and the Nighthawk. They shot that. That's the first credited kill for a stealth airplane, was on an S-300 missile system. And the Nighthawk is still one of the stealthiest airplanes on the planet. So if they could shoot that down. So the Russians made a deal with the Israelis when Netanyahu was over there, and he told them, he said, look, we are not going to help Assad build up an offensive on the Israeli border. That's not what we're doing. Whether you believe them or not, I don't think it really matters at this point, because something is kind of coming true. We'll have to keep an eye on it. Little birdie told me, one of you guys out there, and thank you for that information, that ISIS fighters are already skipping back into Jordan. So that means if they're skipping back into Jordan, they're skipping back into Libya, they're skipping back in, again, that cattle rustling that I was telling you about, the world's most extreme and largest cattle rustling competition on the planet. All these jihadis that have Russian bombs, that actually want to kill them, okay, they've lost leaders. If they've lost ISIS leaders, Mossad and the CIA and British MI6 or whatever, MI5, MI6, have lost agents. That's what the U.S. is mad about. Now these ISIS guys have nobody's steering the ship. You know what I mean? These guys are just going to run rogue. You can't corral them and manipulate them to go here or there. They're going to run all over like a jihadist. They're like gremlins. They're just going to get into everything. So they're going to start heading towards Israel and stuff like that. You make no mistake about it. These guys are good. You can't control them. That's the problem with mercenary proxy armies, is they're unpredictable. And who knows? Maybe the Russians might even start paying the ISIS guys to start attacking Israel, Saudi Arabia, etc. You know, it's a dirty game. We don't know. Now, the thing is the Israelis, they must be pissing their pants right now. Again, I'm not discounting the Israelis military. They do set a standard. They can't be second best at what they're doing. They're too small of a nation, literally in size, to defend it. The only place they can really defend is the Golan Heights. After that, if anything gets past that, they're pretty much undefendable. So their guys have to be 10 times better than anybody else. They arm their civilians. They almost everybody there, I think from 16 to 19 does a year or so in the Israeli military. They're trained they're trained to the fight to the death, and their pilots are very, very good. It takes 5 years to bring an Israeli pilot up to scratch. So these guys, they're no chumps. They're tanks. They understood that with the Merkava tank after the 67 war and the 73 war, that a tank was cheap to replace. So that instead of using the Centurion tanks and I guess the M60s Pattons and stuff like that, they lost so many. But it was like, to replenish the tanks was nothing. But to replenish the crew, the crew is much more important, because you can build a tank in a few days, and if they're cheap tanks like a T-55, you could probably ram them out, mass production off the conveyor belt. But the thing is the crew takes months and months and years to train. So they built the Merkava tank, one of the best battle tanks on the planet. But again, the numbers, they're just not going to be able to compete with the numbers. And you better believe, if Iran is giving Hezbollah tanks, and they are, I know where those tanks are going to end up. They're going to end up on the Israeli border. So the Israelis last week, I reported that there was a bit of a confrontation between Russian Su-30, 6 Russian Su-30s and 4 Israeli planes. Now, it comes from an Israeli source. The article read something along the lines of, the Israeli airplanes were in attack formation and getting very close to the Syrian border, so I guess they were going to go knock out some Assad's troops again. And in that, remember, the Russians have declared a no-fly zone. Upcoming to meet it was these 6 Su-30s. The Israelis did the calculation and said it would have resulted into 4 lost F-15s. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have lost any Su-30s on the. I'm sure they would have. It probably would have been 4 for 4. They probably would have lost 4 Su-30s, because the F-15 is still a phenomenal airplane. Even though the Israeli airplane isn't quite as hot-rodded as the have all the stuff that the American version has, they're still very, very good. But you have to understand what the Su-30 is. It's an airplane that can climb or out-climb 10 miles a minute. I don't know what the F-15 was used to climb at, about 8 miles a minute, like the same as the F-4 Phantom. It might climb 10 miles a minute with upgrades and stuff like that. So they're comparable in climb rate. In maneuverability, they're both about the same. And once you get in above 200 miles an hour, they both maneuver about the same. Su-30 is a little heavier, sure. Altitude, I don't know which one would be higher, but they're probably splitting hairs there. Range, Su-30 has the range internally and externally. If it has drop tanks, it can outrange. Where the main advantage to the Su-30 is that it's an electronic warfare airplane, in the sense that it can jam radar, and it's really specifically designed for ground attack and stuff like that, but also jamming enemy aircraft radar. And this advantage +2. 4-on-4 +2 flying cap. There's no way 4 Israeli F-15s would be able to get unscathed in entanglement with that cave bear. I mean, that's. I'm not saying the Russians would win, but they're not fighting Saddam's forces. They're not fighting MiG-23s and Syrian MiG-21s or Frogfoots. No, they're fighting real super fighters, and this we've never seen before in the world. We've never seen a real toe-to-toe against like the bigger super fighters, like the flanker line. The only thing I've ever tracked down on the Su-27 was between Eritrea and Somalia, where an Su-27 got shot down by a MiG-29, that type of thing. MiG-29s have been shot down, Saddam's MiG-29s, but these were the old MiG-29s, not the new ones. The new ones are, again, far superior. The Russians don't reinvent the wheel. They got the same cake, just better icing on it, and that icing goes a long way. And this is what the Israelis realized. So right there, the Israelis were basically giving in to the Russian no-fly zone. Now that said, the Russians said, we're not going to put the S-300 missile that will shoot down all your airplanes and your good pilots, we are not going to put that in Syria. We will not do that. Trust us. No, all they're doing is keeping the S-300s missiles on the warships based at Tartus, which cover well into Israel. Yeah, they've got a no-fly zone. This is what is the problem. On top of that, in the same week, I don't know if this was a couple of days ago or whatever from the making of the video, it looks like, I don't know if it was 2 F-16s or 4 F-16s or whatever, came across paths with the SU-30s again. They got within 20 miles of each other. So again, this is like leading to and you guys heard me talk about the Kursk submarine incident. We're so close to that. Only this time, it's in a theater of war. This is not a training drill. This is a theater of war. This is as close as we can get to a shooting war right now with the Russians. This is how Syria can lead to it. The second a Russian airplane is shot down by a U.S. or a NATO airplane, it's game on. It doesn't mean they'll go to thermal nuclear, but that they'll start shooting back, and they'll start shooting back and shooting back and forth. Next thing you know, you've got tanks rolling everywhere. Next thing you know, you've got people dying everywhere. Next thing you know, you've got nukes flying in the air. It just escalates. It's escalating, right? So this is the Cold War. We've never even seen this in the first Cold War. We're new territory here. On top of that, Turkey is really pissed at the Russians. This is where it gets scary. This is the scariest part out of all. The Russians flew into Turkish airspace, apparently. Now you have to understand, the Turks want to overthrow Assad. That's why they're mad at the Russians. And they've been bombing the Kurds when the Kurds are, one of the most effective forces of fighting ISIS. You got those brave women over there in the PKK fighting ISIS, and it's the most dishonorable way those ISIS guys can die, because they're getting killed by a woman, right? They won't go to see Allah, which you go girls. But they're terrorists, but they're fighting. They'll arm other groups like the Free Syrian Army, but they don't want to arm them, right? So the Turks are bombing them every now and then, and they're one of the better forces to take out ISIS. But you have to understand, it was even on the mainstream media that there was a delegate from Turkey saying, "Oh no, well we might deal with ISIS now, and then we'll work on Assad later." So their goal is to take out Assad. Now this pair of Russian jets, I don't know if they were Su-24s or Su-34s. I believe they were Su-24s. Don't quote me on that. Flew into Turkish airspace. They scrambled Turkish jets to come up and meet it. They got painted by radar, the Turkish jets, by Russians. That's scary, because when you paint something with a radar, you're tracking it. When after you track it, you lock onto it. You can fire a missile. That's 2 stages away from the opening shots of World War III, right there. 2. Yeah, but Turkey's not really. Yeah, they're in it. If they're in it. Now, on top of that, again, it's people are starting to say, how come the Russians, in only 2-3 weeks since they've been bombing, not even 3 weeks since they've been bombing, have almost all but wiped out ISIS. And we've been bombing them since last year? It's kind of exposing the plans. Now, there's been 2 slip-ups on mainstream media. One comes from CNN saying and this is what all these Congress people are saying, why they're saying shoot down the Russian airplanes, is that, they're hitting our coalition forces on the ground. Well, what coalition forces could you be talking about? What do you want, Kazoo? Keep it down over there. I can't. No, keep it down over there. Anyway, the coalition forces, like the Free Syrian Army, but it's not just the Free Syrian Army. So on CNN, I think it was just a slip of the tongue, but it goes something along the lines, blah, 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 Congress are upset about and warning that it will escalate the war in Syria because bombing ISIS will only make matters worse. But it's okay if the NATO airplanes bomb ISIS. That won't make matters worse. But if the Russians do it, it makes matters worse. Okay, maybe I'm losing something in translation. I don't know. And he goes, they're worried about the Russians bombing, U.S.-backed ISIS fighters. Yeah, that's what he said. I'm like, okay, you mean Free Syrian Army, right? I'm sure it was a slip of the tongue. It had to be a slip of the tongue. The second one comes from Obama himself. And he said, yeah, U.S. supported ISIS. Or, sorry, ISIL. Not the same. ISIS is different. Remember, there's IS, ISIS, ISIL. And then Free Syrian Army, Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Nusra Front, the Khorasan Group, all these other guys, right? So there's probably about 30, 40 different groups in there of jihadis fighting. But some are terrorists. Al-Qaeda, okay, not a terrorist. They are no longer on the, from what I heard, no longer on the FBI's terrorist watch list or DHS terrorist watch list. Because those are the good guys now. Because they're fighting alongside the Free Syrian Army. So the good Al-Qaeda is there. So those guys, openly admitted, are supported by the United States. These are the moderate rebels. If you haven't figured out, there are no moderate rebels. Now, Putin's out there saying, okay, well, Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL, IS, Khorasan Group, the Al-Shabaab, Al-Nusra. Wait a minute, but we're being told by the Syrian government and other intelligence agencies that these guys are terrorists. So we're bombing terrorists. What coalition forces are you talking about? Please admit to your, tell us who you're supporting. That's what the Russians are doing. They're getting the Americans to admit who they've supported. Yeah, the world is seeing this. Yes, we're arming jihadi groups. Yeah. The American people, they don't want this. It's the Congress. They're lunatics. It exposes them for what they are. They are madmen. So that's what the Russians are doing. I'm not saying the Russians are saints. They're just taking advantage of the situation. This does come back to where the conversation started. Resources, gas pipelines, minerals, all that. Now, the Iraqi military, okay, are kind of, the Americans want them to refuse Russians to fly into their airspace. But the Iraqi government is out there, not the military, but their government is out there saying, no, bring them in. We'll tell you where to bomb. Because they've had enough of this. So U.S. foreign policy is getting ditched. Now, Egypt buying those French-made Mistral aircraft carriers, I wouldn't be surprised if they turn around and sell it to the Russians in the end. Because they need them, right? So, okay, well, France sold them to Egypt. They gave the money back to the Russians because the deal was broke, okay? So now, in the end, what are the Russians going to do with that money? Probably go and buy those same things third hand, right? Why not? So it's like, don't be surprised if that happens. That said, this is dangerous times we are living in. The Russians' air base, they do have, RT on the ground, which, yes, is a propaganda machine for Russia and stuff like that. We know this. And they're showing their air base that's stationed about 40 miles away from ISIS. Now, with that said, it's kind of strange how the Russians have got this going. They're really putting out the propaganda showing, hey, look, we're hitting these guys, we're hitting those guys. We've taken out ISIS leaders, we're taking out their bunkers, we're taking out this, we're taking out their weapons supplies, and they're hitting all kinds of stuff. And they said, we're not just taking, basically the Syrian military's guidance only, they're doing other things. So they've, using a whole host of intelligence to get accurate of where to hit. So I would say, yes, the Syrian army would probably, because they're on the front lines, they're going to say, the guys are right over there, just hit them. They're going to do that. Now, mind you, they're going to get a lot of civilians killed doing that because, it's like, well, if there's 5 ISIS guys in there, screw the other people around it. We don't care because they're protecting them. They're part of the war effort. Remember we talked about this on von Bismarck's Zeppelin War in World War I, that the lady that, sews the uniforms for the soldiers is a part of the war effort. The child that runs messages and back and forth from one building to the next, part of the war effort. That's what total war looks like, and that's what we're seeing, right? So the Russians, where they're getting all their intelligence, who knows? But I can imagine, like anything, This is, there's going to be a lot of people, spy, counter spy, double, triple spy, double, quadruple, loopy-doopy spy, and then of course there's like Edward Snowden, God knows how many triple spy he is, and he's pretty much openly admitted a spy himself, So, so there's going to be a lot of that dirtiness going on. So if he's got, people, they're going to be using people on the ground saying, oh yeah, you're already in there. I mean, the Mossad has been doing this for years. They get their guy in there and they just, they just live amongst them, and they could just, whenever they get a chance, they just, go to find a secret radio in the desert somewhere. They're jamming ISIS radio communications, listening in on that. Again, that's what these electronic warfare airplanes can do, is they will pick up radio transmissions. So they're getting a lot of ISIS chatter and homing in on the signal. The Americans were doing this in Afghanistan and Iraq, when this is how technology goes funny on you. A lot of things get just developed by accidents. 67 war, 73 war, the Israelis started building drones instead of flying them over areas instead of getting shot down, right? And now in Iraq and Afghanistan, you had jihadis basically using cell phones to communicate. It was the best system they could use. So then, okay, we jam the signals. Okay, fine. You send in at the time you could send in a A6 Prowler and jam all the communication signals. Now, what the Russians are doing is the same thing. Only what they're doing, instead of jamming the signals, they're leaving the signals open and they're listening. They'll tell us where they are. And the Taliban, the Al Qaeda guys, they picked up on this. So what they do, they take their cell phone, they dial a number, they get one of their next of kin, or get some poor little girl to call her cousin on that phone. CIA analysts, oh yeah, they're chatting. One of the saying, it sounds like it's his cousin or his niece or nephew or whatever making a phone call, so he must be there. And they do the bomb strike, next thing you know, oh, it's a whole bunch of civilians killed. So they're not stupid. These guys are not stupid. But that said, the Russians are using that, correlating with the Syrian army, correlating with their own intelligence, and God knows whoever, because, these countries, none of them have, like Saudi Arabia, no friends. Turkey, there's a lot, they got a lot of discontentment in there. There's going to be people that are going to switch sides, so it's dirty. It's dirty. So but it seems like the Russians are getting accurate intel. That's the point. And if they're taking out ISIS this quickly, okay, and you're seeing ISIS flee to the hills, and Putin said it best, they're mercenaries. This guy pays them more, they'll fight for them. Even he says, okay, they're not really Islamic. Some of them are, don't get me wrong. Again, we've talked about our three types of jihadis. The guy who gets his family bombed out by a drone, an Obama drone, and like this hospital, which was, again, on Obama's order. And he's getting payback, right? And then you got the second guy, the mercenary, and then you got the third guy that's witnessing the end times prophecy of the Muslim Bible, and he's doing his Islamic duty. So end times prophecy, jihadi via mercenary, and avenging your family's death or kin. So you can see how it's going to destabilize. Yes, it's probably going to backfire on the Russians a little bit too, but it does seem like they are doing accurate. And the rest of the world's looking at it. How come these guys are being so successful? What do they know that we don't? But the thing is that's the whole game. Is the Russians know it's a scam. They're probably getting most of their intelligence from probably double agent CIA guys. Again, that coup that I was talking about, that U.S. military coup that's going to happen in the States, it's not going to be televised. My hunch is this. It's already going on, because think about this. How many whistleblowers have you seen come out against the Obama administration on foreign policy that they knew that would lead to this death and destruction? And yet these guys end up in jail rather than getting a medal. How many people don't get prosecuted? Again, when people stop believing in rule of law, bad things happen. So you're telling me that every CIA agent is so loyal, there's no chance they would leak some information to the Russians? Think about it. It's the guys in the know, the spooks. Call them spooks with a conscience. Call them whatever you want. I bet you those mercenaries have been paid well. Here, they're going to be dropping weapons to ISIS here. They're going to be dropping the weapons over there. Coordinate with the Free Syrian Army. Get them in this place at this date and time. Explain the success. 3 weeks, and you've almost wiped out ISIS? Well, maybe not almost, because you have to understand, ISIS is an ideology. It's not just, it's groups of jihadis and mercenaries. But it's an ideology of a one-world caliphate. You can't fight it with bombs. But what they're fighting is the mercenaries, right? The ones that are basically the proxy army against Assad. This is the ultimate Russian veto against Iran. So, that said, Iran is mobilizing. Even Lebanon is mobilizing. They're backing Hezbollah to fight, and guaranteed if the Iranians are backing Hezbollah as well, giving them tanks, it's only a matter of time before they end up on the Israeli border. So the Israelis have got to be shitting bricks right now. They know that they're surrounded by people that really, really hate them. Now, Saudi Arabia, apparently there's a lot of discontent there too. There might be an overthrow in Saudi Arabia. I can't say when, but that's the word on the grapevine. We'll have to watch that. But again, Saudi Arabia doesn't get attacked by ISIS. Turkey, trains up ISIS, lets them run across the border, pretends to attack them. I mean, that's why, and the ones that do attack, they don't attack the PKK, which are a terrorist group too, like Hezbollah. Like, there's no good guys there. These groups are factions. It's tribal. They're all killing each other. So the PKK, yeah, they are, done terrorism too, sure. But the thing is they're fighting ISIS, okay, and the Turkish government's not backing them. They're not backing the Kurds. So that's the whole thing. So you can really see it for what it is. So that's going to backfire when these jihadis start flooding back into all these other countries. If they can't make headway in Syria, they're going to go somewhere. They're going to go to Israel. They're going to go to Jordan. They're going to go to United Arab Emirates. They're going to go to all these countries where they got their training from in the first place. And they're just going to rip that place up. Why? Because they're a death cult. That's what ISIS is made up of, is death cult. That's what these mercenaries... What do you think a mercenary is? They love death. They don't care about the cause. They love killing. They're psychos. They're completely... They love death. That's... If you can't pick up on that, I don't know what to tell you. But I'm going to leave it at about that. So times are getting very intense. The rhetoric in the U.S. Congress is kill Russians, kill Russians, kill Russians. Very dangerous time. You've got a neocon-dominated Senate and House down there in the States. The Democrats have led us into the war. So you might as well say they're neocons too, closet neocons. Hillary Clinton, again, if she wins the next election, World War III almost instantaneous. But I don't think it's going to stand that long. I do believe there will be a U.S. military... I'm not making any threats, but there will be a U.S. military coup in the United States. Now, it might not be an obvious one, but if we see the Russians completely sweep Syria of ISIS... Now, these 150,000 Russian troops, conscripts that Russia's hiring up and training up, I don't know all the details on that. I don't know if this is a usual thing or an unusual thing. And somebody else sent me another missile test, people mistaking for UFOs in the sky. I can't remember where, but the people were speaking English, so I don't know where this was. It sounded like it was in the States, so it could have been a Minuteman III missile test or whatever. They make unusual patterns in the sky, and people, it's like the dinosaurs watching the big space rock coming in. They're like, interesting, I wonder what it does. That type of thing. So, next to that, I'm going to leave it at about that. And if you want to check out my WW3 Updates Facebook page, you can go there and you can put geopolitical, anything that you think is linked to the geopolitical, you can put it on videos up there or articles or whatever. It's for everybody, shared for everybody. All you guys that have been helping me out with this stuff, thank you very much, because again, this is not just for me, it's for everybody, right? The message is much more important than the man. I can't stress that enough. But the other thing, too, is that you can also go to my Twitter, which I just basically post this video there. I don't follow Twitter all day, that type of thing. I don't even tweet there. I just basically post this video. But it might get a new audience to, wake more people up or whatever. And that's just not Reg Me at Twitter or whatever. And next to that... if you like this kind of content, links down below to make donations. Thank you very much to everybody who has. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Maybe buy some, non-perishable food and take some of your old clothing to a homeless shelter somewhere. Help some people out in need. Prepare wisely. I can't stress enough. Make sure, with all the crazy economic stuff going on, this war could be being pushed purposely to hide an economic crash, or the extreme bleed-outs becoming impossible. Too many people are noticing. We are living in the war cycle, so to speak, the 300-year war cycle and the 7-year financial thing, the Shemitah and all that stuff, and of course at the time of the blood moon. So we'll have to watch, which just passed. So we'll have to watch. Maybe that's something, maybe it's nothing. But geopolitically, just the stuff that's openly admitted should be raising an eyebrow or two, or making it go like this out of terror. I don't know. These videos are not about fear porn. They're trying to be as factually based as possible. It really, yes, there's speculation in here, sure. But we're speculating on events that are currently going on in our world. This is a dangerous world we're living in. It's violent, yes, but this is now dangerous because we are getting closer to the Putin crazy man, wild man showdown. When he calls NATO's bluff, and again, I've said this before with China, they call a bluff, it's a 50-50 win or lose. But if they lose, they don't lose much. The Russians are different. They call a 50-50 win or lose. If they win everything. They win the whole thing. If they lose an arm. They commit. And this loss could be construed as they win, NATO backs down, the U.S. economy collapses, game over, the Anglo-American empire system just crumbles. They lose, well, I hope the cockroaches are much more civil to each other than we were. Anyway, next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like, be true to yourself, be true to others, always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day. G'day, and welcome. All right, boy, the world is getting pretty interesting. I was in town the other day, yesterday, doing my driving thing. They're almost at the well, I guess I'm just a little over the halfway point now, so it takes forever to get done. But anyway, I was walking along the bus, and I met up with one of the guys from the LaRouche pack. I don't know if he was Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, or Hungarian, but yeah, pretty thick accent. But I donated $10 to the LaRouche pack and stuff like that, and he was talking about Glass-Steagall up here and stuff like that, which was really, kind of a strange idea for Canada in some ways, but we did have something like that. So it's just people are not aware of what it is. So it was interesting to see him so close to Parliament Hill and stuff like that. But he was talking about like the economic war that's kind of going on between Russia, China, and all the BRICS nations, and which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Singapore, and then of course with the Chinese AIIB with they got like something like 105 countries signed on to that, and right now it turns out that the Chinese yuan is basically fourth most traded currency right now. So they're making grounds there. Doesn't mean they're not corrupt. Doesn't mean they're not in the doing. It's just different empires fighting, right? But that's one thing he did say was he talked about the transatlantic Anglo-American empire. And how it's kind of fighting with, the Eurasian Pacific Empire, right? The world being kind of split into two. Now, Lyndon LaRouche himself, I listen to him from time to time, and the man, he's up there pretty good. But the LaRouche pack, they seem pretty cool in the sense that they do know what's going on, and they do explain themselves well. And one of the good points he made, and this kind of comes into what this World War III update is going to kind of, some of the things that are going to be in it, is he was talking about, particularly here in Canada. And you've probably heard me say in the past that Canada has the capacity, with all our resources and everything we have, to be a world superpower, non-nuclear superpower. If we wanted to be a nuclear superpower, it would be, it's just a decision, okay, do we enrich the uranium today or tomorrow? Most people around the world get their uranium from us. And Canada we're like number one in mining usually in a lot of places. That's kind of our expertise, especially going abroad. Sometimes it can be a bit controversial, but that's some of what we do here. So what he was saying, he goes, is like Canada's system is the same as the States, where it's a debt-based, it's a monetary system that's basically debt-based for profit, but it doesn't, which would be okay if it actually made profit, but it doesn't make profit, right? And you get these too big to fails and all this, rather than a, benefit humanity. So what he was talking about was like big energy projects, and the LaRouche pack has been talking a lot about cold fusion and working on that and stuff like that, and we are close to it. They have sustained fusion for a few seconds. Now, sustaining it indefinitely, that's, I think we're a long way away from that, but we have to invest in it for it to happen. Now, cold fusion, I say, yeah, invest in it a bit, but, here in Canada, hydroelectric. I mean, we got so much freaking water here. Quebec here has the lowest emissions in just about any industrialized area on the planet because of our hydro. We can run everything off of hydro, which we send more hydro to the States than what we use here. We're only 8 million people in Quebec. That's it. So there's not, that's a lot of light bulbs. Don't get me wrong, but still, it's nothing. We can export this resource as much as we want, and it's renewable, right? So it's things like that. So there's no reason why, for example, Quebec should have the deficit it has. There's no reason why Canada should have the deficit it has at all. And like he goes like we have all these resources. What's the problem? Because they're managed by a handful of corrupt people that keep they artificially inflate one thing and hold back other things, right? So that's kind of what him and I were talking about there. And it was a good 10-minute interview. I called it LaRouche Pack interview. Glass-Steagall for Canada, I think is what I called it. So you might want to check it out. And it's more. I only asked him really 2 questions in there. I just let the guy go because he was flowing pretty good. So I wish I had a little bit more time to spend, but I had to run. So, but it was kind of like man on the street type of thing. And I did ask him about the Bank of Canada lawsuit if he had heard of it, and he says, yeah. He says it's going nowhere. But it's still what I think is they're just going to tie it up in the courts for the next 1,000 years, right? So we'll have to see what happens with that. Because again, we're using the same British system, monetary system of the like the City of London, not the City of London, but the banking sector City of London. That's what pretty much all the Anglo-American Empire uses, is that system, right? Which is basically resource extraction through war, is one way to look at it, and it's a death and debt-based economy for the United States. So basically, the Americans aren't manufacturing anything hardly anymore. Us, we manufacture, not like we used to, but we're still manufacturing, and we have a much more stable economy, even though it's not as big. Again, we had Prime Minister Harper here talking about global instability. And again, you got to give him the credit on this. He is the only one out there that is talking about, hey, look, in 2008 there's been micro crash after micro crash all over the place. We weathered that storm pretty good, and it's true, we did. We still haven't hit our 2008 crash yet. I know there's some people who will disagree with me on it, but trust me, we haven't taken the hit yet. We're still under 10%, well under 10% unemployment. We haven't taken the hit yet. When we look at other countries like Greece and Spain, they have 50 to 70% unemployment amongst the youth. It's just, and in the States, although they hide the job, they calculate the job numbers pretty corruptly. They have pretty much a third of their population almost out of work. They have 94 to 96 million people out of work, out of a 318 million, give or take a few million population down there. So they're in big trouble. So my prime minister is saying, look, the micro crashes in China, stuff like that. These things we want to stay the course that we're doing now within the system that we're in. Okay, which is going to play into the whole war thing. This is what this whole war is about. Is the control of this system. It's almost impossible to keep it going. For example, in the States in the past month, they've enacted martial law in the House